Hello, and welcome to another podcast Spark Hub episode. My name is Alan, and this will be categorized under history. Now, we all know how important history is, and in this episode, we're going to speak to two guys named Ali and Graham, who founded a podcast about just over a decade ago called The Rex Factor. What started as just a conversation between friends about diving deep on particular royal moments in British history translated quickly into a podcast when that was becoming a thing, and is now since branched into many different applications and opportunities to allow people to learn history in a fascinating way. So without further ado, let's dive in and hear all about the Rex Factor. So hello, Graham and Ali. Thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate your time. And I'm going to start, as is tradition here on Spark Hub, the topic or the category is history. And I would love, maybe we'll go in alphabetical order. Ali, we'll start with you. Do you have a quote about history that you love?
I do, but I'll have to ask Graham to tell me what it is. It's the one from Elizabeth I, when she says about being quite a lady or something. I know the King of England too. Heart of a lady and all that.
The Tilbury speech.
Yeah.
I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king and a King of England too.
Yes, because it was not only a great quote, inspiring the Spanish Armada, but delivered in Essex. And third of all, it was the basis of the start of this podcast. Well, not specifically that, but it was when we were starting to think of the title for it. It was that quote that got bandied about a bit as an absolutely awful idea for the title of this podcast by me.
Well, that is a great quote. I love it.
It encapsulates this bit of my life.
So, gentlemen, history. Of all the topics that you guys could choose, why did you decide to go and do history specifically as a podcast, and specifically royal history, and call it the Rex Factor? I'd love to hear, beyond the quote, how you guys kicked this off and why you kicked this off.
Well, yeah, so we were friends from work, so we were both on a graduate scheme at our local, county council. And yeah, I think we just established over sort of various lunches, probably in the park in the sort of nice long summer days, that we both had a shared interest in history. So we both did it at university. And I can't remember exactly how we got to the point of monarchs and podcasts, but I think essentially we ended up with a kind of debate on who was England's best monarch. And Ali's favourite at that time was Edward I, and mine was, at least in terms of interest, not necessarily the best, but was Henry VIII. And I think that sort of inspired the start and the idea of being able to find a way to decide who was the best by ranking them and having certain categories, sort of top trump style, that meant that you could say officially which one was the best. And I think after that, I went and had a quick look on Wikipedia at all the monarchs and was quite intrigued by some of the Saxon ones I'd never heard of before, but had quite amusing or inspiring tales to them. And I thought, I think this would be quite fun actually to do one on every single one. Wow,
that's a big list, because it goes back thousands of years, doesn't it?
How many is there that we of kings?
It was 50 odd that we did, so it goes back to Alfred the Great in 871, the point at which we start. So wow. Yes, to say it's over 1,000 years.
So there's kind of a format that I use on Spark Hub. I always like to start with the end in mind and work backwards. And so, for example, what is the opportunity? The opportunity is to learn history. How do you get there? What are the sparks that you light along the way to arrive at the opportunity? It sounds like a healthy competition. I mean, I could see why Henry VIII would be chosen. He is clearly one of the most fascinating monarchs, or even with global interest, let alone digging into the dukes of the area. But this podcast that you guys started, it started out as a little bit, as you say, as a top trump, as a competition, and it seems to have flowered, because when I opened up the Rex Factor I use Apple, and I was on podcasts in Apple, I found there was loads of episodes. So you guys have been quite prolific, and it seems that, forget just doing one per monarch, it seems you guys can go sideways, vertically, horizontally. You can delve into all kinds of stuff. So I'd love to hear how it went from this little competition to what it is today. Like you guys just kept going by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
You just grew.
Yeah, I mean that there was definitely times early on where it would have been really easy to say, well, let's just pack it in. But Graham fortunately has the organization just kept plugging away. And after a while, there was, quite quickly actually, there was all these other characters that appeared that sort of sat outside of this timeline that we were quite clearly working our way through, that needed their own episode. So quickly we saw that there was stuff outside of the thing we'd created initially. And from there, we then started to do special episodes just on random subjects like tea that were sent in by people. So it's just opened up the whole format for us.
People can get quite obsessed with tea. Sorry, go on, Ali.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say it was one of those where they sort of, I guess, the monetization of podcasts to sort of help us as well, because initially that was something that we just didn't look at all and didn't really have any interest in. So people used to ask if there was a way that they could donate, and initially we were saying, oh well, no, it's fine, we just do this. But eventually we stuck on, I think, a PayPal donate badge when we found that was there. And then we initially were hosted by a podcast provider called Podbean, which started doing a patron program. Well, actually, initially they had a bonus episodes program that we discovered didn't really work properly because it hadn't been used until we started using it, and then there was problems. But
it was that early in podcasting.
Yeah. Well, but I think finding that there was a way that you could sell the special episodes or that people would donate monthly, then kind of sparked us, I suppose, to start doing that extra content. Once you know that people are interested, and the more we start to do it, the more people start to sign up. You then start to have more ideas about things that we could do beyond just that basic thing of reviewing the monarchs.
So this was what I like to call in marketing user-generated content, UGC. So people starting to not only engage with your content, but want to participate and shape it. And just give me a year that you started this, just for historical reference. What year did you guys start?
Was it?
Yeah, the podcast started in 2010. Yeah.
And you started at the same time in 2010.
Oh, that's when we started. That's when we started doing our podcast.
In 2010. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that fascinates me because there's this might get a little technical, but you guys have maybe heard of the Web3, which is sort of the decentralized internet, right? Where things can live on blockchain and immutable ledgers, and it gets into really crazy stuff. But the essence of it is the topic you've chosen, which is history, seems to run deep with people. And what I've noticed as myself as a marketer, and one of the reasons I'm starting Spark Hub myself, is because I want to go on a similar journey. And I love that what you guys have been through, that you started just as a conversation, and now suddenly your conversation is almost decentralized in the past few years. And now you have participation from the outside. And what's fascinating is people came to you wanting to give you money, which I find amazing, to do more, to get to keep you going and stuff like that. And so when the initial donations came in, what was it used to improve your equipment, to improve the frequency? Like where did that investment go when you started getting donations?
It did eventually. Like I think initially we were just, when it was just Podbean donation buttons, it was just one-off payments. So every now and again, someone gave us some money, and then I guess we just sort of thought, oh, this is nice, little treat for us. Sort of like, I think there's the website Buy Me a Coffee or things like that, and it was that almost that kind of thing. It was before that, but it was that kind of effect. But I think once it started coming in a bit more seriously, and particularly once then there was the monthly option, that's when we started to think about how we could make improvements. So our first thing was to get new sound equipment, because we just had a basic USB mic and sound wasn't all that great. So we invested in new proper microphones and getting a bit of sound quality. And so initially I think that was the focus, that thinking, well, we can pay for this sort of stuff, the things that you have to spend money on, like microphones and the equipment that comes with it, like paying to be hosted on the podcast, because also when you start to get more listens and more episodes, you have to get a slightly higher account level with your provider. So initially it was just that sort of thing. I think really thinking, well, actually we can do this for free now. Basically, it no longer costs us to do this.
Amazing. And it makes me think of when I was a kid, I used to play racing games where you started out with a really crappy car and you'd win a couple races and you'd start snapping on new bits and you'd improve the car, and then you could win more races. I would be fascinated to know what you know about your audience, like who started taking an interest in this, how did they find you, and then where are you at today in terms of the profile of your audience and what countries they're in. Are you able to tell me more about that journey?
Well, we have the stuff that Facebook can give you, but they've started to close that down a little bit.
They call it deprecation. They call it deprecation of audiences. They a wonderful word for it. Anyway, go on.
But we did have the listens from Podbean, but now because we've gone over to Patreon, there's we don't have that historic data anymore. But what we do know is that it's mostly the States by about 1%. I think it's 51% the States, and just about the same amount skewed to women. I think maybe slightly more.
Not 51% instead, but like they're the main. It's like US and UK are the sort of the two big
blocks
of listens. And as you say, sort of more women than men, we think.
You think? And it's interesting how much the Americans take an interest in British history, and so it doesn't surprise me at all that you guys are having such a big impact in the US and probably a great demand for it. They seem to love the royals and the British history, and
are jolly generous as well. It really was that moment that Graham's talking about of when we put the PayPal button on was just about, it was fate. It was just about the time when it was getting we were doing it regularly. It was more than a hobby, but we didn't, there was no end goal. It all just evolved. And at that point, I remember clearly Graham saying, "Never guess what? Someone's given us some money." I went, "What?" "Oh yeah, I just put this button on there and that people just gave us money," because we were still having so much fun doing it that it never struck us that really could make money from it. And I think at that point we're like, well, I sort of smelt green blood and went after it.
Well, we never really promoted it or anything, or done anything. Like every now and again,
organic discovery.
So every now and again, like I think like we got a thing in the Radio Times one time, and other things like that. Every now and again, a thing like that happened, and we thought, oh, maybe this is a thing that's going to see us skyrocket and become this huge hit. And it never quite made such a massive change to stats or anything. So just going like that, it didn't feel like anything dramatic would happen. But I think it is one of those where once we started doing more content because people were starting to give us money for it, that sort of drove more people to come to it. I don't know. It just somehow it's
a snowball effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in marketing, I think they call it the network effect. So you hit like a tipping point, and eventually you'll hit bigger and bigger audiences. And so it's great that you guys have put in what sounds like nearly a decade of great conversation, and it's yielded results because you've got great audio equipment and clearly a great audience. And so how do you start to interact with them? Do they make requests to you and say, "We'd love to hear more about this," or "I loved episode 6. Can you dive deeper on?" I mean, does it start to get to that level of interactivity?
Oh yeah. So what were the early tiers? That's how it started, wasn't it, Graham?
So like initially we just we started doing just an episode which is called the Privy Chamber, which is basically kind of a extra stuff on the main episode that maybe doesn't make it into the main podcast, but a bit of extra notes that I've cut out. But then we had a tier. The top tier was that people could commission a special episode where we do a kind of feature length on any topic of their choice, really. We had to shut that down after a while because we had so many that we were kind of a backlog of several years that we've not quite finished the Podbean backlog yet because it was
my goodness,
too many people.
It's like Santa's getting too many letters.
Yeah, we upped the level, but they still came in, so we just had to completely cancel it. So what we sort of try to do now is we've got a tier where the whole reward tier level they get to commission. So we kind of present options based on what they've suggested, and then they all get to vote to decide on the special episode. And also a new thing we've got called Local Legends, which is a kind of a quick, shorter look at something which might be like a statue you've seen from your local area, or a plaque, or a building, and you've always wondered what that's about, or you do know but you'd like us to find out. So we're sort of trying to find a way that we can get them to lead some of that bonus content.
So everything they pay for, they're involved in.
Wow. So you're kind of historical hired sleuths now.
Yeah.
A
bit like,
I like that.
Yeah, I like it too. And surely it's very energizing to have that level of feedback and to be at a point where you can't get to it all. And
Yeah.
so how frequent are you guys producing stuff each month or each week? Is it regular, your frequency of production, or yeah?
Yeah, it's very regular now. So we do a thing called, which we'll be doing after this, called Tuesday Talks, which we record on a Monday but release on Tuesday. So that's weekly now for our subscribers on Patreon. So every week we do just a chat on giving an update on what we've done during the week and reading out messages and stuff that people have sent in. And then we try to have at least every 2 weeks on the main feed, so the free podcast feed, at least 2 weeks have an episode out, which isn't necessarily always reviewing a king or queen, but it's either that or like we started doing interviews with other historians or things like that. So every couple of weeks releasing main episodes, at least weekly bonus content, and sometimes there's maybe more than one thing in a week. Which that again is because of doing Patreon. I now on Mondays am paid by the podcast to do research. So that's really freed up my ability to keep up the pace, because there was a point where there's a tipping point actually where sometimes you can get too much extra stuff to do. So there's a point where actually I couldn't keep up anymore, particularly having young children and all the pandemic stuff and all that kind of thing. It started to get a little bit out of hand, but actually the Mondays has now meant that I'm able to get solid research time. And that's enabling us to, get very regular output.
But then we've hit the same barrier where Graham's now got more time, so he can do more things. And then he runs out of time. And it's a lovely effect, it's really good. And it's great that, people are actually paying us now to the point where, Graham's semi-professional podcasting. It's great. But the interactivity we were talking about a minute ago, it gets to quite an extreme level now with things like Discord that just weren't around at the very, very start.
That's right.
And now sort of it's like, it really is like we have effectively a WhatsApp group of all X-Factor fans. It's a whole new world.
It is, and that's why I was saying that this decentralization, Discord is just one of many apps that is now in that ecosystem. And I don't like to use the word, but I'll use it because it's good. It's like almost the anti-Facebook, the anti-Twitter, the anti-censorship, which obviously has downsides, but I don't think you guys fall afoul of any of that type of stuff. It just seems like there's a hunger for what you're delivering, and it's wonderful to hear, Graham, that you're able to dedicate stuff. And it sort of segues into my next question. Is all three of us here on this call have children, and all three of us, I imagine, in our own ways, suffered during the pandemic with the homeschooling and things like that. And so what fascinates me and what I've been driven to do with Spark Hub is look at the alternative ways to get children to learn about certain topics. And so, for example, history, I'm doing my best to try and teach my son some form of history, or at least say, hey, here's some content. I've tried to get him onto Rex Factor, but I think, you guys obviously target an older audience. So has there ever been a demand for you guys to do something that's better for children? Like an example I might use is Horrible Histories, which I see on the BBC, and I find it a bit garish and a bit too much, but I just wonder if you guys I know you're busy, but is there ever a question you could branch out into a form of Rex Factor for children, say from the ages of 6 to 12? Has that ever come up? Has it ever been of an interest, or do you not have time to get to it? What's your sort of thinking on teaching history to children in a fun way?
We've had the podcast is family friendly, but the topic can be gruesome. But we've had some really good what's the word that doesn't sound awful in this? Some really good developments, some projects in exactly that space where kids have really enjoyed it. So we did an animated show that is now used by the Richard III Museum. It was about Richard III, and the Richard III Museum use it for their school trips. So the kids watch the show and then answer activity sheets. And that all came about from the History Channel, we were doing what's it called? A Kickstarter type thing, crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Yeah, crowdfunding. and the History Channel noticed this, and we were going through the stages with them before they realized quite how much animation costs and pulled the plug on it.
Oh no.
But yeah, no, so there's always stuff going on. And as a result of the of that work with the Richard III Museum, we're hopefully developing an app with them that we can then sell our intellectual property rights in this way. So we actually, you know, app developers do the work and we're just licensing them. So it frees us up to continue doing this whilst exploiting the value of it.
So at its simplest level, is it the audio content that you've created that has then been repurposed for animations and now potentially apps? Is that sort of how it's progressed?
Yeah. So
sorry. No, so we re-record. So we worked with so there's an animation company called Tim Mouse Animation, which got in touch with us, and one of the main guy listened to Rex Factor, and he happened to live in Chelmsford. So he said, "Would you be interested in us animating you?" Which I said yes. So we did actually re-record. So it was Richard III. So it was based on our podcast of Richard III that we'd done.
So it was an episode,
but we re-recorded audio for the animation, so it wasn't the original podcast. We could kind of redo it and rework on it. But obviously the work that we've done, both the podcast and the research, obviously is all there as a basis for picking stuff up. And yeah, as Ali said, we're sort of looking at other things like that. And we do get messages from teachers sometimes asking about whether that's something we'd be interested in doing. And it definitely is. But like you said, it is one of those where if you kind of really want to target it, you need to be able to spend time to actually really looking at the curriculum and being a bit more specific rather than just, here's what we do, this is interesting. But
I mean, it's interesting to me because it strikes me there's two applications that pop to my mind. And just before I get to that, I was always a big fan in the early days of a Ricky Gervais podcast that he did with Carl Pilkington. And what they did is the Flintstone animators who originally did all the Hanna-Barbera stuff. They literally took the audio as is. They didn't re-record it, and they just animated around the podcast. And so I've maybe assumed you guys have done similar, but it sounds like they came to you, loved the source material, and then said, guys, let's re-record, redo that. So the two applications that popped into my mind as you were talking is there's teachers who have a curriculum, as you say, and have to, by extension, test that the knowledge has been absorbed. And then there's parents at home who are just trying to pass the time. And I had a huge debate with a friend of mine who restricts their kids' screen time. So they have iPads and restricts it. They have a 30-minute countdown per day, and then they're out of time. We in our household don't do that. Our kids, I won't say unlimited, but they sort of have free reign with their iPads as long as the content is quality. And so that could be anything from BBC, CBeebies shows. It could be, good Netflix shows. Sometimes we allow a little bit of garbage stuff, but you'd be amazed how much, at least my eldest son, who's 9, he goes onto YouTube and he rabbit holes into these science videos from the US. In fact, he keeps asking if we can move to the US because they seem to have more freedom and more science, according to him. And he'll come crashing into my bedroom in the morning and say, "Daddy, do we have any knife rate, soft light, fucking whatever? Because I want to blow our toilet bowl up like this guy did on whatever channel." And so it's fascinating to me to see. It's about, for me at least, quality and quantity, and not just restricting to 30 minutes a day. But I think something like what you guys are saying could be helpful to parents. And in other words, if there were, say, a series of what you did on any channel available anywhere, and parents could just put great animations in front of the kids, they sponge this stuff up if it's delivered in the right way, if it's delivered in a cartoony way, if it's got maybe a little bit of fart humor mixed in, then actually it sticks. And it amazes me how much even a 9-year-old is learning a lot about science and outpaces me when it comes to, oh, how do you do this? How do you do that? He just knows it now because he just binges on these things. So I've rambled a bit, but I think that, school isn't the only place this could live. I think in post-COVID-19, post-homeschooling, just having reams of content that you can dive into. And it's sort of what I'm trying to explore with Spark Hub on a personal level is just creating that quality content that's great for kids. Animation is perfect, but as you say, there's a production cost to that. It's very expensive. And I remember as a kid doing frame by frame stuff. So I can't imagine, even with computers now, it's it's probably more efficient. But as you say, to record 1 minute of animation is a hefty bill. But I do think that, I do wish that you guys luck in continuing that, because all the source material you've generated so far in audio, I certainly could see an application for it, for repurposing it, for creating great video content for it that can live in a sort of exam environment, as well as just parents who are fed up for the day and want to hand their kids some stuff to watch. The point being, guys, is I think that you have so many branches to what you do, and if history can be made fascinating for all age groups, you can take Richard III and like The Simpsons, you can create layers with it. You can create the kid-friendly version, and then you have the adult version who are probably going to keep you up at midnight on Discord asking for a deeper dive on certain things. Well, gentlemen, this has been a great chat. I'm conscious you need to get on to your Monday. Was it Tuesday
talks that we recorded?
Tuesday talks. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I think Rex Factor is great, and I do hope it becomes a tree of many branches. Obviously, if I can help, I will. But really, thanks for telling me about the journey. Quite an exciting one, and one I hope to sort of emulate in my own way. And then hopefully one day we can collaborate a bit if I can get mine a bit further along as well.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, sounds great.
All the best with everything.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.
All right. You too. Cheerio.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. If you like what you hear, you can dive into a lot more on thesparkhub.com.